Hi everyone, let's get started. Welcome to the No Fear Job Search webinar series. My name is Linda and I'm the marketing coordinator at Jobscan. If you're not familiar with Jobscan yet, we're a Seattle-based company dedicated to making the best online tools for job seekers. We put the No Fear Job Search webinar series together in response to all the uncertainty and stress in the world and especially the job market right now. Our goal with the series is simply to get as many job seekers as we can in front of the people and the tools that can help them right now. And today's webinar is the 12th of 16 in the No Fear Job Search series. Today we have Lezlie Garr speaking on how to create a resume that stands out during a recession. We do only have 4 sessions left, so if you want to check those out, you can do so at jobscan.co/no-fear. I am excited to turn it over to today's presenter, Lezlie Garr. Welcome, Lezlie, and feel free to take it away.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Linda. Thank you to everybody at Jobscan for putting this webinar series together. It has been a thrill to watch it come together and see how many people are excited about it, and I am definitely excited to be a part of it. Thank you to all of you attending up bright and early, at least for those of us in the US. It's still pretty early. Thank you so much for being here. I know you're excited to be here and to learn something about resumes. Okay, so my take on this topic was to share quick tips to tweak your resume. My hope really is that by the end of the presentation, you can take the information that I give you, take the resources that I give you, and turn back around and apply them immediately to your resume to make some changes that will make a big impact on your job search. So that's my hope with the information today. And actually, all of the content for the presentation is based around questions from real people like you who reached out to me after Jobscan announced the webinar series and announced who was going to be a part of it. I got lots of new connections on LinkedIn saying, hey, I'm going to be on the webinar, or I'm excited, that you guys are doing this. And I took that opportunity to ask some questions and to say, hey, what do you want to know? What questions do you have? What can I tell you that will be helpful and that will be actionable for you to make immediate changes and improve your resume? So that's really what all the information in the presentation today is going to be centered around. So some of the real people questions is what I call them, the questions I got from real actual people. Some of you might even be watching right now. I took the 3 sort of biggest themes that came out of these questions, and that's what I based the presentation around. So one of the big questions was about conflicting advice for resumes. There's so much different resume advice out there. How do I know what's right, who's telling the truth, what I should use for my resume? And before we dive too deep into it, the first thing I just want to say to sort of help ease worries is that there's no 100% right way to write a resume. There are definitely some wrong ways, and we'll talk about, best practices, but there's no 100% absolutely right way that works for everybody. But there are core concepts that you can follow and use as guidelines to help you understand and make decisions about what content should go in your resume and how it should all be presented on the page. So that is the first section that we'll talk about, is just those core concepts. Another question that came through frequently was, what keywords? How do I know what keywords I should be using in my resume to get through the online applicant tracking systems? So we'll talk a little bit about how I find keywords for my clients' resumes. I'll show you the exact tools that I use to help you sort of get the ball rolling with that yourself. And then the last question that came up that I'm going to address is about constant overhaul. So do I have to change my resume for every single job that I apply to? And the answer is no, you should not have to do that. If you go through the stages and the right process and really thoughtfully put your resume together based on some of these core concepts and based on the right keywords, then targeting the jobs that you're going for should not require changing your resume every time. So we'll talk about a good rule of thumb to sort of understand when you might want to edit your resume for a job application and when it should be okay to just go ahead and apply to it. What we'll cover, I'll do a quick intro just so you know a little bit more about me. We'll talk about those resume core concepts that I addressed a minute ago. We'll talk about how to find and use the right resume keywords. And then we'll talk about the 2020 rule of resume retargeting. And that's not something that you'll find if you go try to Google that. That's just something that I have come up with to sort of give a better conceptual understanding of how much effort you should be putting into retargeting your resume for every job description, or rather not for every job. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that rule is. If you go to my website and you visit resumelezlie.com/jobscan, you'll be able to download the full course slide deck for this presentation. So get all the slides that I show you today. I also put together some additional free downloads for you. One is a resume ebook, one is a resume checklist, and another is a resume blueprint guide. So all of those should help to reiterate what I talked to you about today, help you remember, and even take it a little bit further into applying some of these practices to your resume. There are also some additional free resources in there, some great information. I highly encourage you to visit that website. I'll show you the link again at the end. And when you download these slides, all of the links that are in here will be clickable. So they're all in one place and easy for you to find. All right, so to tell you a little bit about me and what makes me qualified to take up an hour of your time today, I am a certified career transition coach and professional resume writer. I have had my own business as a resume writer since 2014. I've had over 600 clients in that time, helped to create resumes that were engaging and effective and helped them have a more successful job search and land the jobs that they were looking for. But I did not start my career out planning to be a resume writer or an entrepreneur at all. I actually started my career in 2008, which, if you'll remember, was another difficult time in the job market. I was just going for, typical corporate types of jobs, hoping somebody would hire me in a recession. I actually, over the next several years, went through a lot of career pivots, a lot of changes, and just sort of soul searching to figure out what I wanted to do. So I have that experience of switching direction and still being effective with my resume and my interview, even if my background didn't quite match up with what they were thinking that they were looking for or what some of the other candidates might have had. And then I also, by the time I did get around to starting my business, that was not intentional either. It was after a completely unexpected layoff. So I've been through job searching in a recession. I've been through trying to figure out what to do after layoff. And I hope that that experience helps to give you some insights and make you feel a little bit better about your plan moving forward with your resume. And before we dive into the actual resume content, I did just want to take a minute to talk about the differences of job searching during a recession versus job searching in maybe a little bit easier time. And the basic thing that I try to remember is that if you're job searching during a harder time, a recession, a downturn economy, all the best practices become more important. So best practices for your resume become more important because the competition is higher and there are more people out there who may not make that one typo mistake or grammatical error, or may have a better formatting or some other best practice for your resume. So that becomes very important when there are more people out there competing for the same jobs. Another thing that becomes more important is your soft skills. And I really feel like that's something that has been growing in the job market over the last probably 10 years or more. Companies are hiring whole humans. Companies know that someone who has some, but not all of the hard skills, the technical skills, but who really has some incredible soft skills and who can be adaptable and work with a team and communicate effectively and learn quickly. Companies want to hire someone who they know is going to be a good fit on the human side, and then they're comfortable training that person up on the technical side if that's what needs to happen. So it's just important, especially in a recession, that you can be the whole human that they're looking for. So don't forget about your soft skills while you're trying to brush up on some of the more technical skills for your industry or your type of job. And the last thing that I would say becomes more important is in a recession is your strategy. So not only are you trying to do all the right things with research and applying to the right jobs and following up at the right time and networking and all of those things, there's a strategy too to understanding the companies that you're working or that you're applying to and the industries that you're trying to get into or that you're continuing in. Because in a downturn economy, especially in a time like this, that's pretty unprecedented and completely unexpected, you want to think about what companies are setting themselves up to be successful in the long term. What industries are looking like they're going to have good projections over the next few years as opposed to maybe some downward projections over the next few years. So there's an extra element to your strategy as well that becomes more important when you're job searching during a recession. So beyond that, we are going to move into more of the resume core concepts that I talked about in the beginning. So there's no 100% right way to write a resume, but if you follow some core concepts, it can really help you, like I said, to just decide what content needs to go into your resume, to decide how you want that to look on your resume, and exactly what you want to showcase. So the top 3 core concepts that I really use as a foundation and then continuously come back to anytime I'm making edits or adjustments or tweaking anything. The 3 core concepts that I always really think about are the formatting, the keyword targeting, and showcasing your results. So in this first section, we'll dive into each one of these individually. The keyword targeting, just so you know, in the first section, we're just going to talk about why it's important and where to do that in your resume. And then when we get into section 2, I'll talk more in depth about how to know what keywords you should be using and how to find those keywords and sort of hone in on the right ones for you. But for section 1, we're going to go through each of these individually and just talk a little bit about some of the best practices for that. So formatting really is your first impression. When you send a resume for a job, especially if you haven't been referred by someone you know or someone who knows you and you haven't been doing a lot of networking, a lot of times when someone opens your resume for the first time, the first thing they see before any of the actual content is going to be your formatting. And I actually kind of think that formatting doesn't get enough credit. We hear content is king a lot. We hear it about marketing. And since resumes are very much a marketing document, it comes into play with resumes as well. Content is king. And I agree with that. It absolutely is. Your content is the most important piece of your resume. But I'll argue that if your formatting isn't right, the content may not even get the chance to speak. The reader may not even take the time to read further. If they see a format that's just a complete mess or makes them not want to read further, if it doesn't simplify things for them, then your content may not get the chance to speak at all. So before anyone reads your content, they see your formatting and they make a judgment call about it. So you want to make sure it's clean. You want to make sure it's easy to read, and you want to make sure that it guides the reader's eye to your most important and relevant information. A few best practices before I get into a couple of examples, so you'll actually get to see what I'm talking about. Some best practices for formatting with your job descriptions. It is currently and has been for a while and probably will be for a while, the best practice to use reverse chronological order for your job descriptions. So reverse chronological really simply just means that when you get into your professional experience, you're going to list your current job or whatever's your most recent job first. And then below that, you're going to list the one that was directly before that, and so on. In the past, a functionally formatted resume has been very, very popular, and I still have people ask me about it or say, hey, I want to use a functional format instead. And the reason that that is less effective now than it was in the past is because functional formatted resumes were used to cover up gaps in employment or certain maybe unsavory aspects of someone's career history that they didn't necessarily want to emphasize right away or broadcast to the reader right away. So they thought, well, I'll try to hide it by creating a functional format where instead of my jobs going in order, they're going to be grouped into sections based on the function that I served or the industry I was in or what have you. And the reason that doesn't work is because recruiters got savvy to that. They now see a functional format and immediately go, uh-oh, what's wrong with this person's background? So it's best to use reverse chronological. And if you have some of those less than ideal aspects about your career history, there are other, better, more creative ways to work with those without trying to fool anybody or without the recruiter feeling like they have to search for all the red flags that might be in your resume or your career history. So that's a big one. And I feel like I get that question more often than maybe I expect to. So I wanted to be sure to address that. As for length, typically you want to shoot for 1 to 2 pages. Again, there's no hard or fast rule. Every once in a while, somebody needs the room to have a 3-page resume. Every once in a while, somebody doesn't need the room and a 1-page resume is okay. The thing I want you to think about is relevance. So if you have truly relevant job experience that warrants 2 pages, that's totally fine. Even 3 pages if you're a super high level executive, board of directors, something like that. If you're younger, you have less experience, or maybe if you're transitioning to a career that's completely different from what you did before, you might keep it to 1 page and just make sure that all of your information is concise and relevant. That's the most important piece when it comes to resume length. For your margins, try to stick between a 1/2 inch and 1 inch. I usually shoot for a 0.8. That gives me enough room to get the content in without the text overwhelming the page. That's just a quick rule of thumb. You want to use the white space on the page to create some clarity and make the content easier to read. For your employment dates, I see all kinds of different takes on employment dates. So my recommendation is to keep your employment dates aligned along the right-hand side. That's where recruiters prefer to see it. It makes it really easy for them to spot all of your employment dates. It also is where most applicant tracking systems are programmed to find them. So you're helping yourself out with the tech and with the humans if you put your dates in the right place. And I'll show you some examples here in just a minute. And then the final thing, and you'll see some examples of this, is bullet points. For your job descriptions especially, you don't want to just use a big fat paragraph of text. Nobody's going to read it. None of that content is going to come across. If you utilize bullet points to separate the different ideas, the brain automatically picks up on that faster and can sort of digest that information a little bit more quickly. So you want to use bullet points in your job descriptions to help separate some of that information. Moving on to some examples of this. So this is a before and after example. This was an actual client that I had that I went through and anonymized all of the personal information and the company names and things like that. But the basics of the content is all the same. This on the left is the resume that she sent me first, and then on the right is what we wound up with. And the first thing that I want you to notice is just the difference in the way the 2 resumes come across. The resume on the left, the before, it starts directly with education, goes right into experience, work experience, and you don't ever get an impression of who this person is, what they're trying to do, what they're targeting, what value they can bring to you if you're the hiring manager. None of that comes across. So what we did was we put in a professional profile section. This is a question that I actually get quite frequently, and I got from someone who was planning to attend this webinar. They asked me, is the profile section, the summary section, is that really that important? And while you're never going to get a 100% answer from every single person you ask, by and large, the consensus is yes, that section is important. It allows you, number one, to keyword load some good keywords for the jobs that you're applying for. But overall, for the human aspect of it, it clues the reader into who you are, what you're targeting, and the value that you bring to the table. So this professional profile will have often a headline here that kind of says, here's what I'm targeting. It'll have a short paragraph. Sometimes you'll see bullet points. Everybody kind of has a different opinion on that. This is one of the ones that I like best, is just a very short paragraph that gives the big picture of what you have to offer. And then it's followed with some skills here. And again, all of this is related to keywords, which we'll get into in later sections. Another thing you'll notice is even in the new one, I know there's kind of a lot of white space in the old one, but even in the new one, we're very careful to make sure that white space helps to separate the text and differentiate various sections. The brain, when it can compartmentalize, it can remember things better. So it just helps someone to fully digest your information if you have it set up in a more user-friendly sort of format. What comes next? What comes after the profile section? There are really a few different options. There's really several different options because, again, there's no 100% right way. Everybody's different, so it depends on what your needs are and what's going to be most relevant. So the first option I have here is where I have education or licenses and certifications that directly follow the profile. I'll do that when it's a recent grad or a young professional or someone who's recently gone back to school for a new degree or new certifications or licenses, because that is going to be more relevant than their career history. So when your education or your certifications are more relevant or they really add a high level of value, whereas your career experience maybe doesn't quite match up or isn't quite as relevant, you want to move that section up towards the top. You don't want to put it above your profile, but it can be the first thing after the profile. So that's one option. A couple of other options are to go ahead and get right into the professional experience. So with the example on the left, we go straight from the profile into the professional experience because her professional experience was more relevant than her education. So if you looked at the whole resume, more of her education would be at the bottom. On the right here, I have what I called a special circumstance. It's basically just a blanket term to talk about somebody who doesn't quite fit into the mold. This particular case, the resume on the right was somebody who was completely changing careers. So he went from being a professional baseball talent scout, which I thought was pretty cool, but for personal reasons, he had to make a change. So he decided he was going to go into the corporate world and he wanted to do sales management and business development. We talked and he had a lot of really good background to fit towards that. It was just a matter of making sure a reader could see that. So what I did with the professional profile was I really directly targeted those positions that he was looking for. I used all the right keywords to help prove that he had those skills for the sales and business development. But if someone were to read that and then go directly into his professional experience, it might be a little bit of a disconnect because they'd go, well, okay, up top, you told me you had all the sales and business development experience, but now I'm seeing that you were a talent scout. Like, what? So what I did was I created just a short career overview section, 2 sentences that connected the dots and showed how, as a pro talent scout, these were the sales skills that I used. Now, I do want to point out that I did the same in his job descriptions. I didn't just use all the wording of a baseball talent scout. I made sure to overhaul that wording as well. But it was more about taking out that moment of confusion for the reader if they went straight from a totally sales management targeted profile, and then all of a sudden saw their most recent job was with, you know, the Chicago Cubs or whoever it was before I anonymized the resume. So it's just about telling the story in the best way possible and making it as easy for the reader to see that you are the candidate that they're looking for. And moving into the formatting for the job descriptions, I have two examples here too. The first thing I want you to notice is in both examples, we've got the dates right here along the right-hand margin, and there's nothing else really out here. Every once in a while, the text will come a little bit further out, but even that, I have it set so it doesn't go all the way to the edge. So you'll see the dates are really, really easy to see. Same thing with this one. In the job description on the left, it is an example of someone who had one job per company. So that happens with a lot of us. We go to a company, we have a job, and then when we get ready to leave, it's a whole different company, and so on. With that, it's pretty simplistic. You just list the job or the company, the dates, the job title, description. If you get into a situation where you've had multiple jobs for a singular employer, a lot of what I see that doesn't work quite as well is people will list the employer name and the dates and the job title. And then for the next one, they'll do the exact same employer name again, and they'll do those dates in the title, and then they'll do the exact same employer name again and those dates. That takes up more space that you could be using for more engaging information. So instead of doing that, I advise to have what I call like an umbrella date at the top. So we have the employer that you were with through all of these jobs. And on the right-hand side in the margin, I have the full tenure dates that this person was at that job. That gives them sort of the credit for having a longer tenure with the employer, which really goes a long way to showing your loyalty, trustworthiness, things like that. And then with each position, I listed it, and instead of putting the dates all the way out to the right, which would sort of muddle up that whole, hey, I was at this employer for a long time, I keep the dates right next to the job title. That keeps things more clean, but it still allows the reader to be able to discern when you were with which position and how sort of your moving up within that company went and when it happened. All right, moving into concept number 2, we talked about formatting. Now let's talk a little bit about keyword targeting. Again, in this section, it's just going to be a really quick example of where and how to do this in your resume. And in section 2, we'll get into how to find the right ones for you. Keywords do play a major role in the success of your resume, especially when it comes to applicant tracking systems. They basically parse through each resume that comes in for a job application, and they compare it to the set of requirements that the employer says is necessary for the job. And the ATS are looking for a percentage match between the words in your resume and the words in the job description or the requirements that the employer has set for the job. If you don't have a high enough percentage match, then it's not going to get through, and the chances of a real human actually seeing your resume are slim to none. So some of the ways that you can, or some of the places in your resume that you can bring out these keywords, the first one comes right at the top in the professional profile. Again, I'll talk to you about what keywords to use in a minute, but for right now, let's just take a look at what I've done with this resume. I had a client who really wanted to blend two sections of her career history. She had a long legal history, and then she had a little bit of healthcare compliance and legal compliance there, and a little bit of project management. And she said, you know what? I really want to find a role that blends all of those. So the job that I had in creating really the resume as a whole, but the profile section, was to make sure that we bring out her legal background, that we bring out her leadership, and that we bring out her skill and experience in project management and compliance. So I've highlighted, or rather underlined, a lot of the words that sort of lead to that message that we're trying to say. Of course, the entire profile, I tried my best to get as many of the relevant keywords in there and really make it flow and be cohesive. But the ones that I've underlined are really showing her legal experience, her project management, her leadership, legal, compliance, project management. So we're creating this brand for her in her profile to show that she has all of these experience that she's really wanting to utilize in this next role that she wants to get. And it's important to note that you have to continue that work in the rest of the resume. So you can't just keyword load the top of the resume and the profile and say, okay, well, that's good. The rest of the descriptions, I'm just going to leave them as is. You want to go through your job descriptions as well and figure out how to speak that same language and describe what you did, incorporating those keywords. So again, I've gone through and sort of underlined just the few keywords in here that back up those few things that I mentioned in the top: the leadership, the legal, compliance, project management. So it's important to not just stop at the top with the profile, continue that sort of keyword incorporation throughout the entire resume. And then concept number 3 is showcasing your results. I like to say results get results. When it comes to resumes, your achievements and results are often sort of your only unique differentiator between you and another candidate who has a lot of similar experience. This is a way that you can show how you uniquely contributed to the success of your company. Results go a long way to prove your value. Anybody can claim that they have skills, but without proof, it doesn't really mean much. You want to back up your claim. So if you're using keywords in the top or in your skills section and you're saying, I have X, Y, and Z skills, you want to not only try to demonstrate that with your job descriptions, but if there is an achievement that you've had or some sort of result that you've brought about that was positive for your company that included your use of that skill, that is going to be proof positive that you actually can do what you say you can do. And when you think about it from the perspective of a hiring manager or a recruiter, that's what they're trying to figure out. They're trying to figure out, is this person really who they say they are, or did they just put a bunch of words on a page? So being able to demonstrate your results is a great way to sort of let them feel at ease and let them know that you really are who you say you are and you can do what you say you can do. So you want to use keywords to establish your value and to elevate yourself above the competition. Sorry, I skipped one. Here we go. So a couple of examples of showcasing your results. There are 2 different examples here of just formatting ways to do this. There are, of course, other ways to do it. These are just the 2 that I most often use and the 2 that I thought would be good to share with you. So on the left, I have put together the bullet points such that each one emphasizes some sort of specific achievement or result that the candidate was able to accomplish. In this case, this particular candidate was a change maker. Their whole sort of thing in their work was to come into a struggling company and make it better in some way to improve operations or do something. So pretty much every job they had was all about results. Everything they did was completely results oriented. So it wouldn't make sense to try and split all of those out for each job and list them all together. Instead, I used just some bold formatting to bold the most important pieces of that description. So you want to bring it out that way when a recruiter who gets something like 200, 300 resumes for a job application, when they're very quickly going through your resume, you want them to be able to scan it and see the important pieces. So that's why I use the bold, and that's why I tried to get the active part of the bullet point right at the front. That way it's all in line. I can bold it and they can pick it out one by one. On the right, you'll see another example of how I will showcase results. So in this case, I call it an end cap, and it's basically, I have the job description here. I have a short paragraph at the top, and I do that in both of these examples. It's a very short paragraph that just gives the general responsibilities or the scope of the position. And then in this case, all the bullet points are important pieces of how this person uniquely did their job and excelled at it, but there aren't any specific results or changes or metrics that we can show for these things, but they're still important to show. So I list the bullet points there, and then at the bottom, I will end cap their job descriptions with a differently formatted, again in bold, description of a specific result. A lot of times I'll try to show metrics, dollar amounts, percentages, anything like that that can go as far as we can to prove what those achievements were. But these are two great ways to make sure that even at first glance, your results are showing, your achievements are evident, and it makes it really easy for a busy recruiter to come in and see what you've done and really get an idea of your potential to do more for their company. All right, so that was section one. That's the bulk. I really wanted to talk about the core concepts of resumes so that you can come back and sort of apply those to whatever you already have and see what changes you can make. Real quickly, I do want to talk to you a little bit about how to find and use the right resume keywords. So we talked about where they go in the resume, and now we can talk a little bit about how to actually understand which ones are right for you. I mentioned that keywords play a major role in resume success, especially with online applicant tracking systems. The thing with that is there are something like 200 different types of software that serve as applicant tracking systems. So it's not like you can just, get a quick hack and understand how to do your resume so that it makes it through all the applicant tracking systems. It's not really the way it works. But again, you can get some general guidelines by doing a little bit of research. So how do you know which keywords are right for you and for your resume? First thing you have to do is understand your target audience. So for resume, your target audience is going to be the hiring managers, decision makers, recruiters who are in the position of making the decision of whether or not to call you in for an interview, right? So the way that you learn about what they're looking for is to first identify the types of jobs that you're targeting and the required skills for those jobs. So what I tell clients when I work with clients one-on-one, the first thing I have them do is send me 5 job descriptions that they feel A, that they're interested in, and B, that they feel qualified for. I let them sort of do some of that research to find stuff that feels like, yeah, I would apply for this job and I feel like I'd have a reasonable expectation of being able to get that job. I actually branch out and find 5 more. So I have a group of 10 jobs to work with. It depends on how much time you have, but I at least 5, 10 is better. But what you'll do is run some data analysis to find common keywords that are used across all of those job descriptions, and then determine how to incorporate those into your own experience. So when we talk about doing data analysis and sort of how to make that happen, there are actually some really approachable, helpful resources online that I have been using since I went into business for myself, and then I know a lot of other resume writers use as well. The first one is Jobscan. Jobscan is an excellent software that can compare your resume to a job description of your choice. You basically just paste your resume into one and the job description into the other. I know that Tim Thomas did his webinar on resumes in the beginning of this series, and I know that he went into some pretty good detail about how to use Jobscan. So I highly recommend going back and finding that when that gets online and when Jobscan puts all these together, because that was a really good explanation, and I'm just going to let him handle that one. I'll talk to you a little bit about the other 2 that I've used as well. One of them you'll see in the middle here is a word cloud. You can just do a Google search, free word cloud, what have you. You'll find something and figure out kind of which one you like better. What a word cloud will do is take a block of text that you copy and paste in there, and it'll create a nice visual to show you the most common words that are used. And then the size of the words kind of tells you, okay, in this case, interviews was used a lot, moving, video, hiring, work, candidate. Those are the bigger words in this image. So those are the ones that were used the most in the block of text that was put in. What I'll say is that this is a great visual representation, and it can help sort of give you an idea of the gist of how the resume should come across. But for me as a resume writer, it wasn't quite as helpful as I wanted it to be because I couldn't do anything with that text. So I moved on to using a word counter a lot, and I can actually show you a quick example of what the word counter does. So I just use, I think it's wordcounter.com. And it just, I copy and paste a block of text. This came from a specific job description. And what it'll do over here on the right is give me some statistics about it. And the one that I use is the keyword density. So you can set it to 1, 2, or 3. So you get one keyword each, and it'll tell you how many times it's used within that block of text. And this can be a great way to understand what's most important to the people writing these job descriptions. And I'll even move on to a 2-word keyword density. So project management, for instance, is an excellent keyword. And even though it's not just one word, it's still important. So you want to make sure that that comes up. And every once in a while, even a 3-word density can be helpful. So I'll use this to understand the most common keywords. I'll do that for each of the jobs that I have, and then I'll actually combine the keywords that I get from each of those, and I'll do one last pass through where I'll put all the keywords into here and figure out which ones are really showing up the most often. So that is how I have really come to understand the best keywords to use for any given resume. And then there's always, you know, a little bit of tweaking. Sometimes maybe you don't have the experience in that keyword, so you don't want to include it. It's about being relevant and also matching it with your previous career history. And finally, section 3, what I call the 2020 rule of resume retargeting. And basically, the way I see it is that if you do the work in the beginning and you approach the resume the right way, you should only ever have to make edits to about 20% of the resume. So you should really never have to do a total overhaul unless you're completely changing career direction. You should only really ever have to make edits to about 20% of the resume. And even then, if you're targeting the jobs that you set out with when you wrote your resume, you should only really have to make those edits about 20% of the time. Now, of course, this isn't any hard fact, you know, something measurable. It's just to give you an idea of how important it is or what you should be looking at. So when I say if you approach it the right way, it's basically all the things that we've talked about today. You want to make sure you're doing research to understand who your target audience is and make sure you know what it is that they're looking for. Then you want to make sure you're targeting that audience with those appropriate keywords that you find during your research. You want to make sure your formatting is clear and concise and makes it easier to read and has a nice flow. And you want to make sure you are putting your results out there and really emphasizing those to show the difference between you and another candidate who has similar experience. So if you have the right approach to your resume, then the 2020 rule of resume retargeting really should apply. You shouldn't have to change it for everyone. You should only really have to change it for about 20% of the jobs that you apply to. And even then, it should only be about 20% of the resume. Take a look at the skills at the top and see if there's one or two that can be changed out. Take a look at some of the bullet points in your job descriptions and see if there's one or two that can be changed to sort of match better what's in the applicant tracking system or what's in the job description, rather. And to help you have an idea of when you might want to make edits or what some of the situations are that might be smart to make edits, I would say the first one is if you find 100% the perfect job for you. If you come across a job description that's just like, wowza, if I got this job, I would be so intensely happy, then yeah, take the time, really do the comparison between your resume and the job description, understand what minor changes can be made to make sure that you are as aligned as possible with what that job description is asking for. Another situation would be if you come across a job that stretches your limits a little bit. So you did all the work of targeting the resume the right way based on a certain type of jobs. And then you're doing your research into those jobs, you're looking for jobs to apply to, and you find one that's just a little bit above your head. Maybe it's just a little bit more in-depth or intense than the work that you've been doing, but you're confident that you could do it if somebody can just give you a chance. That is an opportunity for you to come back to your resume and see where you can connect the dots and draw those connections between what you've done and what's being asked for. And that same idea applies to jobs that are a little outside the box. So you've been in your job search targeting jobs in a certain area, and somehow you come across a job that's not really in line with that totally. But to you, you can see, you're like, yeah, I absolutely have the skills to do this. I absolutely can do this job. Then again, come back to your resume and see where you can make minor changes to connect the dots for the reader and show them how you have relevant experience to that job. So that is sort of the 2020 rule of resume formatting as I see it. And that is everything I have for you, at least in the presentation. Again, if you go to resumelezlie.com/jobscan, you'll see the slides for this that you can download. There are also really great free downloads, a Resume Insights ebook, an expert checklist, a resume blueprint guide, also some resources on job searching during a pandemic, COVID-19 resources. I really tried to just put as much together as I possibly could for you. And then if you have questions, if you want to reach out to me, my email address is leslie@resumelezlie.com. I will leave this slide up for you so you can kind of take a look at that for a minute. Note the odd spelling with the Z in Lezlie. But yeah, you can email me anytime. I'm happy to answer questions. Most of you probably found me on LinkedIn, so you know where to find me there. But I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that good social media stuff. And with that, I think that's everything. I'm going to hand it back over to Linda. Thank you so much. This was really fun. I'm glad I was able to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you so much, Lezlie. Let's take some questions now. And we've gotten a lot throughout your presentation. So regarding resume format, do you have a suggested best font or font size?
That is actually a great question. Font does come into play. I have a blog actually that talks about some of the best resume fonts. So if you go to that page and you get into my blog, you should be able to find that. But some of the best practices, I would say, number one, most people recommend a sans serif font. So one of the fonts that doesn't have that extra ornamentation on the letters. Calibri in Microsoft Word, that's been the default, I think, for Microsoft Word for a while, and that gets used pretty frequently. So that's one that I know is common and very widely acceptable. I personally, and this is just me, I'm a fan of some serif fonts, so I'll use Palantino Linotype, I think is what it's called, or I'll use Book Antiqua. Those are two of the serif fonts that I like to use. And it's important to remember as you're crafting a resume, if you get into a situation of, oh, I don't quite have enough space, to include all this stuff, but I think I need to, you can make minor changes to your font. You can change the font because every font is a slightly different size. So you can make a change to your font to give yourself some extra space. And the last thing I'll say is stick between a 10-point font and a 12-point font. And that's going to change based on the size of the different fonts. So if it's a bigger font, you'll want to go a little smaller. If it's a smaller font, you might want to go a little bigger.
Great, thank you. And what are your thoughts on PDF versus a doc format?
Sure, absolutely. So when I work with clients, I always send them a doc and a PDF, and I tell them that the doc or docx is best for online applications. These days, most ATS are pretty okay with reading most PDF formats, but just to be safe and just as a best practice, I always recommend using the docx for online applications. If you are sending your resume directly to someone via email, or you are wanting to print it out, go ahead and use the PDF format. The PDF will ensure that the document formatting and everything stays exactly the same from system to system. So if you send it via email, they'll get it, and you're assured that it will look exactly the same on their end as it does on your end. Also, they won't be able to make any edits on a PDF, at least without converting it. So it's just good to keep the integrity of your content by sending a PDF to a real human. But if you're doing online, I would say doc.
And you mentioned that soft skills might be more emphasized during times such as recessions. So someone asks, where and how can we showcase our soft skills on our resume?
Sure. So soft skills really shouldn't be separated necessarily. You don't have to have a section that says technical skills, soft skills. They can be incorporated throughout. So all the things that I talked about where to include keywords in your summary paragraph, in your skills section, throughout your job descriptions, you want to ahead of time kind of decide what you feel like are your strongest soft skills that you want to emphasize in your resume, and then you want to emphasize those and incorporate them wherever you can in an organic way. You don't just want to throw words out there because you think you're supposed to have them on there. Really try and craft the content so that it incorporates them in a way that is cohesive and makes sense and kind of flows for the reader. But yeah, anywhere skills are present, soft skills should be a part of that.
Great. And a lot of people are asking how they should address gaps in their resume. So, for example, if they had kids or took some time off to take care of family, or had a job search that lasted longer than they expected, how can they address those, and what actually constitutes like a resume gap?
Sure. I would say what constitutes a resume gap would probably be anything over about a year. Addressing resume gaps is really different for everyone. Some ways to approach that is, if you're on sort of the before side and you know you're going to be having a gap, if you know you're having kids and you're going to stay home, try to stay active outside the home a little bit with volunteering, or if you have school age kids, being involved in their school activities or boards or PTA, things like that. Any work at all, even if it wasn't paid work, can be incorporated into your professional experience so long as you designate that it was, a volunteer position or what have you. That can be incorporated, and a lot of those activities require a lot of the same skills necessary to be in an actual job. Excuse me. So that is one way to really address that. And like I said, everybody's different. So not everybody is going to be able to have that to fall back on. So there are basically just creative ways to handle each different situation. I wish I had a hard and fast rule, but anytime that's come up with clients of mine, which has been often, I've worked with many clients where we've had to address that in one way or the other. And it's always just about getting a little bit creative and, as much as possible, trying to have something in the resume that addresses that gap. So if your gap is from 2005 to 2007, just for instance, try to have something in the chronology of your resume that says 2005 to 2007, because then it won't even really get caught by the ATS. And that doesn't mean to lie. It just means, what can we say about your time that would be valuable, or even just be a small placeholder? Yeah, it's a hard question to answer directly, and you just want to get creative. There are a few rules that you can try and work with, but mostly it's just everybody's situation is different.
Someone asks, how far back should a person with lots of experience go? For example, if they have like over 20 years of experience.
Sure. That is an excellent question. That topic comes up a lot. And again, you're probably tired of hearing me say this at this point, but it's different for everybody. The rule of thumb is 10 to 15 years, but relevance is really most important. I will typically, the further back the job experience goes, give less information. So the current job, the one right before that, the one right before that, those might have more content and more detail. And then the further back you go, you can give a little bit less, and you can just focus on the major achievements or the most important pieces. As you get back more than 15 years, a lot of times what I'll do is create what I call an earlier career section. So I will either drastically minimize the content and formatting, so it's still basically set up the same with the employer on the left and the dates on the right, and minimal descriptions. Or I will take it down even further, and instead of listing it that way, I'll just give a couple short sentences that say from 1992 to 1996 this, or I won't even give dates sometimes. I'll say you spent 4 years as sales manager for blah, blah, blah. And that way it still shows the reader what your experience is, and that your experience goes back further. A lot of times if you just sort of cut it off and don't say anything, it can seem like wherever your resume ends is wherever your career started. But if you can indicate somehow that, hey, I had experience before that, I just know that you don't want to know every single detail about it. If you can give the relevant information and show where your career started, or just what makes up your full career, that can be good. And then as it goes back like into the 80s, those are the ones that I'll just totally drop off, because everything was so vastly sort of different then. But for the most part, for earlier career, I like to indicate it in some way, but you can definitely sort of drastically reduce it so it doesn't take up so much space.
And let's just take one more question here to wrap it up. I'm seeing, a lot of people in the chat. I think a lot of people are in the mid to late stage of their career. A lot of people are dealing with age discrimination. Mary and a couple other people ask, any advice for older job seekers feeling discouraged right now, or what can we do if we're worried about ageism?
Sure. And that is absolutely 100% a real thing. It's unfortunate, but ageism is a thing. All the various isms come into play at times in a job search. The best thing I can do, or I would tell you to do, is to try and make sure that your resume is as modern looking as possible, number one. So an outdated format to a resume can tip somebody off right away. And it's not even so much your actual age that they might be concerned about. Oftentimes it's worrying that you won't be able to keep up with the new technology or changes or whatever it is that they're going through. But if your resume automatically comes across as modern and speaking the right language and telling them exactly what they need to know, that's going to really help your case. And then talking about the earlier career experience as well, you can minimize that, really focus on the current things that you're doing or the most recent things that you've been doing. And as long as you can show that you provide value, like real value when you go into a company, that's going to be the most important piece. So just try and keep your resume as modern as possible. Try to minimize some of that earlier experience and really focus on the value that you continue to bring day in and day out in your jobs.
Yeah. Leslie, where can people find examples of more modern resumes? Were those examples you showed in your presentation?
Yeah, I have examples on my website. So it's resumelezlie.com slash, I think it's just slash examples. It might be slash resume examples, but if you go to slash Jobscan, resumelezlie.com slash Jobscan, you'll be able to access my whole website. So you can see in the menu where the resume examples are. But yes, I do have resume examples for before and after. And also one of the free downloads is a resume blueprint guide. So it actually has an example of a resume layout and some pointers on what to remember about each of the sections or where the content should go.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you for providing so many resources for people right now.
Yeah, I'm pleased to do it. Pleased to do it. Thank you for having me here. Thanks again to the whole team at Jobscan, and thank you to everybody for being here. I have really enjoyed it.
Me too. So we are up on our time here, but thank you everyone for joining. And thanks again, Leslie. I hope everyone has learned a lot of new tips on crafting their resume today. I hope to see you at some of our other webinars this week as we wrap this series up. But best of luck to all of you in your job searches and navigating these difficult times. Bye, Leslie.
Bye.
Online listings make applying for jobs easier than ever. So why aren't you getting a response from employers? Easy applications means more applicants, which means more competition. Leading companies use automated software tools called Applicant Tracking Systems, or ATS, that weed out many resumes before they even reach a real person. So how do you cut through the noise? With Jobscan. Jobscan uses artificial intelligence to get your resume past the filters. We've reverse engineered their systems to create an intelligent tool that provides proprietary insights to optimize your resume at a much deeper level. So you can tailor your resume for each job based on precise keywords and skills most valued by the company. Jobscan can even optimize your LinkedIn profile so company recruiters find you before you even know they're looking for your skill set. Let Jobscan maximize your chances with every application. Register for your free account and run your first scan today.